2025 rule changes, points of emphasis, and again, the IHSA updates will slide to the end. All right. So as far as the NFHS is concerned, I know IHSA, we get our books every other year. So it depends on what kind of rotation maybe you are on. But if you do need to purchase the new books for this year, make sure you grab them or you get them. And if you don't buy the books, grab those rule updates from NFHS. You know, we've got our videos, we've got this as a clinic that'll give that all to you. But if you're looking for something in writing or where you need to look at it in the future, not a bad idea to get your hand on those rules and case books. Like I said, we're going to go over the 2024 recap of those rules, the 2025 new stuff. And again, we moved the IHSA. All right, so let's hit last year's changes. So last year, there was a slight change where we were allowing electronic information to be transmitted to the dugout from outside. So that was where if there was a camera or something outside of the dugout, and that information could be then fed into the dugout. That is still consistent today. And again, it was just letting them use more of that technology piece into their coaching habits. But we're not saying where it has to be from. It doesn't have to be on the back stuff or above the dugout. There's some lateral movement where they can have it depending on where they want outside the confines of the field and dugout area. For uniform restrictions, again, this is in the future, so we're not really worried about that right now. It's kind of getting uniform across all of NFHS as far as their uniform restrictions are concerned. So not something that we're applying at all right now. So we're just going to kind of move on past that. The easing of the headbands and ribbon restrictions. So players are allowed now basically to have hairpiece adornments, ribbons and other things that are decorative, and that there's no problem with that, headbands and whatnot. The idea though, as long as it's not distracting. So on a bright sunny day, maybe it's a neon yellow kind of thing. Those are the kind of things we have to be aware of. Ball colored type items, as well as if it is distracting to you as an umpire, because if it's distracting to you as an umpire, I guarantee you it's probably distracting the batter and more importantly, the catcher, because we don't want them to not protect us. So if it's glinting off the sun weird or whatever, and you want to talk about it, that's fine. But for the most part, we're not concerned about anything that the students are putting on their head. Plastic, though, visors are still not allowed. But outside of that, the headbands and ribbons, we're not restricting any sort of colors or design or anything there. As far as ending the game, this was something that was added, that it depends on the conditions that you're being presented with, whether it be, rain and thunder and lightning to, maybe a forest fire to whatever other pictures. I think I'm trying to remember all the ones that they had last year, just that kind of thing. So it's just, again, unacceptable playing conditions that the umpire has the final call when it comes to if we are going to end a game early. All right. One of those things that continues to be, I wouldn't say an issue, but it's definitely something that I've had to address at least once or twice a season, if not more, are these play cards. When we get to the new 2025 rules, maybe we'll see them a little bit less. But for right now, our rules, again, from 2024, the recap tells us that the two places they're allowed to have a play card is on their wrist or on their belt. Okay. I'm sorry, not on their belt. See, there's me. I'm already looking at the wrong picture. They can have it on their wrist or in their back pocket. I knew I had two legal pictures, and they cannot have it on their belt. So again, it just has to be, they can tuck it away behind them where it's out of view, and then that's fine, as well as having it on their wrist, on their belt or in front of them, and they look down. Those are the kind of things we just remind them nicely. You don't have to make a big scene about it, but we got to have it in an appropriate location. And then when we get to the new stuff this year, I'm thinking some of this might get phased out. It'll be really great to not have to worry about these long, in-depth play cards that have 80 million pitches on them that seem to take us a really, really long time to get a hold of. Speaking of things in the back pocket, pitchers can use the powdered resin. They can use dirt or comparable drying agents. Again, everything that's listed on USA Softball's website and that kind of thing. So where you just have to be kind of careful about with the Gorilla Gold, which is why we have the pictures there, is that the original, that's fine. No problem with that. But anything outside of that, where that's supposed to be used for baseball and softball and such, is just the one where I think it's just golf or something like that, where that's just not one of those that is listed. So by no means am I asking you to go, our officials do not need to go and do an equipment check. We don't need to go and look at the packaging. If they tell you they've got Gorilla Gold, it's probably a good one. It's just to illustrate that there are some drying agents out there that are not usable. So we do have a list of those. If we have to go down that road. But I would just advise you to let the coaches know that, hey, if you guys want to know what's legal or not legal, please take a look at that list that can be found on USA's site. Okay. This was the big change last year. So now we no longer have to have a foot in contact with the ground or at the level playing surface of the ground if a hole was dug throughout the entirety of the pitch. That rule was gone and put off to the side as of last year. So now the leap, as it was defined, is now legal. And again, that was where both feet can now be airborne or off the ground at the same time, but they still need to be within the 24-inch width of the pitching plate. That's our zone that we have to keep both of our feet inside. And that they do not have a replant. So we'll get into that a little bit here in a little bit because the definition got added and some changes there. But the idea being is that as of last year's rule change, we're allowing the leap. So the pitcher that dragged their foot 9 out of 10 times, but then came off the ground in the past where that was illegal, that is no longer there. And I can tell you firsthand experience, that was a great rule change. It made working the bases a lot easier, or at least able to focus on the things that we need to focus on instead of staring at the pitcher the entire time. Now I'm, outside of landing outside the 24-inch and doing something with the hands, licking the hand or going to the ball twice in the glove or something like that. It really reduced down the number of illegal pitches that we were, as base umpires, calling, because you think about a 24-inch zone, we're not going to see that from the bases. And the licking of the hand, if it's a right-handed pitcher and I'm in the A slot, I'm looking through the body, I may not see if that hand got a wipe or not. So the illegal pitches from that standpoint, the only thing that we're really looking now, and we'll get into that definition for 2025, is that replant. All right, I was right on cue. We're going to go into this year's rule changes. So the big one for this year is that now catchers and catchers only are allowed to have a one-way electronic device, meaning only coming into them. They're not allowed to communicate back to anybody using it. They can use it simply to hear, or they can look at a signal, or whatever the case, whatever device that they have, but they're allowed to receive one-way communication from their team while they're on defense. Usually it's from the coach. It says to the catcher while the team is on offense. On defense. So that's going to come from the coach, from the dugout. And that usually has to do with what pitch is being called. Maybe there's a sign on for a steal or a throw or a rundown or something like that, just some other defensive call. But those can now be relayed to the catcher using an electronic device. Again, one way to the catcher only. The catcher cannot send it back out electronically. She can verbally communicate if there's for example, if they tap their chest and say, red 132 or something, and they're trying to convey base coverage on potential steal situation or bunt situation, things like that. Obviously, that's perfectly fine. It's just the electronic piece is that no other player is allowed to have any sort of electronic communication coming into them. So it's just one of those things about if you've got the penalty was added as well as the repeat violations, just as long as they're doing it, it's only the catcher and they're using it the right way. On top of that, so we've got communication devices for other players. We're not going to say that they can't have on a watch and then they can't, they can't wear those things. However, they're not permitted to receive that information from the dugout. So if you happen to notice a player that's consistently looking at their watch throughout the game, this is where we're going because technology is kind of, coming into the aspect. For right now in 2025, that is not legal. They cannot use a watch that is not the catcher, so the first base, right field, whoever. If it's a different player other than the catcher receiving communication, that is illegal at this point in time. But we're not saying they cannot wear those devices. They just cannot be used for communication purposes. As far as the catcher being required to take it on or off, we don't looking at that. If they come to bat, that's fine. They can have it in. They're not required to remove their communication device. However, they cannot use it during their at bat. They should not be receiving instructions from the dugout. So again, just kind of be aware of that. Again, we're traveling down this road together. I will say that I had the opportunity to work a few summer tournaments that did not have any sort of rule restriction in place as far as this kind of stuff goes. And I was able to witness not only a catcher, but a couple of teams that had it on multiple players. It was definitely a different experience. It certainly sped up the game, made those play cards obsolete. Nobody was yelling at each other. They just could look down, and if they didn't get it the first time, they looked down again, so they're not yelling to the coach to repeat the call. So I see this developing and moving more towards an open-minded kind of set as we move out over the next couple of years. But for right now, The only person that's allowed to use it again is the catcher on defense, and it must be one way going into their ear or onto their watch or whatever the case is. I would say also that if a catcher comes up to bat with the watch on, again, they don't have to take it off, but I might actually say, hey, are you sure you want to keep that thing on if it gets hit by pitch? Those things can get pretty expensive. So just kind of, maybe be aware of that part, but you don't ever have to make them take it off. They're allowed to keep that on throughout the game, but they can only use it for communication on defense. All right, let's look at some just minor editorial changes. Again, not going to spend a ton of time here on any of these things. Again, it's just a reminder that our batting helmets and our catcher's helmets need to have the NOSKI stamp. We're not advocating any sort of equipment check. It's certainly not in Illinois. It's not something that we as officials need to do. But if you're happen to sit back there behind your catcher and you just glance up and it's there, that's great. You don't go out of your way to find it on a batter, those kind of things. But, as a batter comes up and you look at it and maybe the helmet looks just different than anything you've seen before, and you can maybe get a glance at it at the back, that's not the worst idea. But don't make this feel like it has to be part of your constant game where you're like, I really need to find this NOSKI sticker. They just need to be there. So there's the batters. And then again, on the side, that's the one we're looking for the catcher. Again, it's not a change. It's just that safety reminder that we're looking for that. Okay, so here's the one I was talking about earlier where they added the definition of the replant this year in Rule 247. The idea is that when a pitcher leaves the ground with both feet and they come down with one of those feet prior to releasing the ball, that they cannot push off from that secondary space. They cannot push off from anywhere other than where the rubber was, and then achieve basically a distance closer to home plate. So in A, we leave the ground, the right foot is going to come down, and then the left foot comes down, but I'm not pushing off of where that right foot landed. I'm just continuing my throw and so on. But if I look in image B, yes, I land again with my right foot, but then I push off that second time, then you see the knee bend, the hole becomes even strong, more depressed in that spot. Then they land at a spot closer to home than when they normally would have. That is what's considered replant. I can say with almost utter certainty that it is very difficult for a high school pitcher to achieve a replant. A lot of times when in past situations, we talked about crow hopping, and it really wasn't a crow hop. It was more of a leap because they were leaving the ground. Crow hop, at least in old definition, required that replant. Those terms are gone. We no longer have a leap. We no longer have a crow hop because those are the leaving of the ground is now legal. So we don't have that stuff. All we're really concerned about is looking for that replant. And I guarantee it, just like anything else, if it does happen, you'll know it when you see it because it'll look very, very different. That one foot comes down, the knee will bend because they can't do it straight legged, right? And you'll see a secondary push, and it basically screams at you, whoa, hold on a second here. So watch your pitchers during warm up. I'm not saying a high school pitcher can't do it. I'm just saying it's very, very rare to see, but we do have it in our rule, and we want to make sure that we're being at least cognizant of that change. All right. Again, something minor, just, no using of tobacco or alcohol or anything else. And that's for everybody, right? Participants, coaches, and officials. And it begins with arriving at the competition site. So that includes in the parking lot. We'll let that conversation just end right there. And it says until the departure from the site the following game. I would highly recommend all officials not doing anything illicit before and after a game. There's places to go that you can celebrate with your fellow officials or hang out afterwards if you need to. But please keep that stuff off of the field and off of school grounds. The dead ball table, this is a lot of mumbo jumbo. Again, you don't need to worry about it. They basically did a rephrase on what the delayed dead ball is, but the rule itself has not changed. So again, I don't really want to go too crazy. The rule hasn't changed for delayed dead ball as far as the awarding goes. Got to get on base. Everybody has to advance one, and you have to get to base safe. Otherwise, you're going to go back and look at what the results of the play was if the coach wants that, or the award for whatever the delayed dead ball was for. So understand that they just had that change put through. All right. Something we do want to spend a bit of time on is our points of emphasis. As NFHS goes, they like to make sure that we're talking about these things. And this year's big one that they're bringing home is that pace of play. Been on plenty of games. I would imagine if I asked for a raise of hands right now, every single official would raise their hand if I said, hey, how many times have you had a game where that time in between an inning was way longer than 1 minute? As a matter of fact, it'd probably be more of the, wow, we actually had it under a minute. That was really crazy fast. And that's really our goal is the NFHS really wants to push that to kind of pick up the pace of our game. We don't need 2.5-hour games in softball. We'll let baseball handle that and the slowness of their sport. But in softball, we should have a really good pace going. Pitchers like to get in a rhythm. Umpires certainly like to get into a rhythm. So the less time that we have in between an inning is absolutely the better. We don't want to risk safety. We want to make sure that they can get warmed up or whatever needs to happen. And there are going to be certain times where we're going over this 60-second idea. But for the most part, we're really going to try to push this and just remind teams politely that, hey, once that last out happens, right, we want to make sure that we're getting that 60 seconds. Now, you're not sitting there with a time. Don't sit there with a watch, counting it out. Just understand that we should have a good mental acuity on how long something is taken, right? Those kind of situations. So if you've got, especially if you have a catcher that was possibly batting or on base, you're going to have some little time delay because they got to get dressed. But if they're still looking to have warm-up pitches, those good teams will send out a backup catcher, a coach that I usually like to make fun of for, how old they look when they get down on, when they go in the crouch and stuff like that. So, you can have a little fun with it, but what we're really trying to do is, again, get that pace going. And just if maybe that pitcher doesn't need all three when the catcher has to go get changed, you can ask the pitch. You're like, hey, do you need all three? And if they say, yeah, I'd like them, then, hey, can someone come and warm up the catcher kind of thing? Be proactive in getting this 60 seconds to go through. It's not only just, getting the defense out there and getting ready, but it's also our offense to getting ready as well, making sure we have a batter. I have two teams distinctly in my brain, and I'll leave those as anonymous, that are notorious for getting me a batter and or their coach out. They love to have discussions, literally taking as long as they can until I have to actually say, hey, I'm going to charge you with a timeout if you don't get down to your box. So remind them to, again, please be cognizant of that 60-second rule. As they get their team off the field and they're talking to them and they're trying to rally up the crowd, we need that on-deck batter getting ready, right? We want that on-deck batter ready. When that throwdown comes to second base, we want that on-deck batter walking to the plate, getting ready for their time at bat, so we're not having even more time in between things. All right. And again, we're just communicating. All of this revolves around communication. We'll talk about all of that in the conflict resolution aspect, but the more we can do of that, the more the preventative officiating side, the less issues we have later in the game. So again, the idea is that once we get out of that 60 seconds, we start our timers, again, by rule, for the batter to get in for 10 seconds and the pitcher has 20 seconds. Now those aren't batter gets in and then it starts at 20 seconds, right? After our 60 seconds are done, both of those things those timers are running concurrently for the batter and for the pitcher. Again, if we're super tardy and we've had a warning and we're like, hey, you guys need to get going, certainly we can start to look at enforcing rules. I highly recommend not just doing this out of the blue and use some preventative officiating and some philosophies here to prevent any sort of backlash that you could receive for having one of these kind of calls without giving proper warnings and clues to saying, hey, this is going to happen unless we start to pick up the pace and get going on some things. All right. This was, a couple of slides I've borrowed from another Illinois clinician. So thank you, Emery. I appreciate that. But this one I thought was really good, especially the last point there where it says the grand total. It is 80 seconds between, it's supposed to be, if you think about the time, right? From the last out is made until the next pitch of the first pitch of the next half inning. So that is the goal. And it is a goal, and I believe it's an attainable goal for many officials. However, like I said, we know there's going to be times you've got a coach that wants to make a lineup change. You've got, a possible person that maybe got hurt coming off the field. There's going to be instances where you're definitely going to be extended past this 80-second point. But working with your players and working with your coaches will help keep that time down to a minimum, hopefully within those 80 seconds that you're able to keep things going. Again, coaches and players, they do love a good pace. Now, when they're trying to get inside their opponent's heads and stuff like that, try to pushing envelopes, that's where you as an official need to kind of step in and say, hey, this is our point of emphasis, is you have that to fall back on in your officiating toolkit to say, the NFHS put out that this year we're really trying to push pace of play. You just need to pick up the pace a little bit. And you just kind of give them those nice reminders. And then if you've given enough, and then you need to start elevating to, hey, I'm going to start calling balls and strikes if we don't have our people in place. You can look to go down that road again after properly warning and having those discussions ahead of time. But this goes for everything, right? So I've also seen the longest ever lineup changes where it's full on discussions and everything else. We want to try to keep these as short as possible. Yes, I know the game hasn't started, so we're still not yet rolling, but we have a 4:30 start for some of our games. Some of those might start a little later. A bus arrives late. We don't need to spend 10 minutes sitting there exchanging lineups, doing a pregame check. There should be a very succinct order and requirements of things that we have to do when we talk about that. But leave those side discussions, those off color comments and things like that. Let that be during an in-between inning where a coach is walking around and you want to say a quick something. They want to talk to you real quick. That's perfect time for that kind of thing, as long, again, you're in with that 60 seconds. But keep your pregame meetings short and precise and to the point. Definitely not a rules clinic. Situational awareness. We often have players that will be warming up, running up and down maybe a foul line or whatever the case is. And there might be, some pitching going on or whatever the case is. We just want to make sure that they are aware of the situation, but they should always be allowed to do those actions as long as they are getting off the field. If there's like substitute players and backups or whatever, that they're getting off the field at the right time. So again, we're not delaying ourselves between those 60 to 80 seconds that we're trying to start that next inning. And then again, if you've got warming up on the confines or whatever the case is, and we have to have a person blocking or protecting, depends on where things are. This could be even pregame, that kind of thing where you want to make sure that everyone's being safe. Recommended though, and I don't think I've got a slide on it, but you should not be having a pregame with your coaches around home plate while pitchers are still warming up, especially if the catcher is facing, is between you and that pitcher, and the ball could possibly come your way. So make sure in your pregame that you get everybody off the field, that there's nobody warming up with a ball, something that you can't see behind you happening, that you want to make sure that you don't have to be cognizant of something being thrown. But in other situations, you may have to have something like this picture where you have a player protecting someone in the confines of the field that's maybe warming up a pitcher or whatever the case is in the bullpen. On deck batter is the same thing. We expect them, they're out and they are not in dead ball territory. So they need to have an awareness about them as well when they could possibly become involved in something, whether it be a pitched or thrown ball, whether that be a hit ball. We'll get into some of those later on, especially in our boundary lines area. But as a reminder, they must use the on-deck circle that is closest to their dugout. That does bring me to the end of the 2024 rules recap and 2025 rules update.